I ordered a pizza at 9:47 p.m. The guy who opened my door wasn't a delivery driver, and he had a key. Long update. That's the first thing I need to get off my chest. When people think of home invasion, they expect a sudden smash of glass. They want a loud, chaotic explosion of violence. A broken window. A screaming match that wakes up the entire apartment complex. A desperate scuffle in the dark. We don't realize how quiet the trap actually is until it springs shut. What I experienced was worse. It was a slow, agonizingly calculated evaporation of safety. For months after that night, it felt like I was living in a house made of cardboard. If I moved too fast, if I breathed too loud, everything would collapse. I spent half a year walking on eggshells inside my own skin. Let's go back to the beginning. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and at the time, I had just moved into my first solo apartment. It was a beautiful, sprawling two-bedroom loft in a gentrifying area of the city. High ceilings, exposed brick, polished hardwood parquetry flooring. It was way too big for one person, honestly. But I got a killer deal on the lease because the building was still half empty. Only a few units on my floor were occupied. My closest neighbors were a middle-aged couple down the hall, Marcus and Elena, who mostly kept to themselves. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 9:47 p.m. when I submitted the order. I remember the digital clock glowing on my microwave like a warning beacon. I had been studying for midterms all day. My brain was completely fried, and my stomach was an empty, echoing pit. I pulled up my usual food delivery app, ordered a standard large pepperoni pizza from a local joint 3 blocks away, and slumped onto my sofa, scrolling mindlessly through TikTok to pass the time. Around 10:12 p.m., the buzzer rang. I didn't check the app. Why would I? I do this 3 times a week. It's a routine, a mindless, automated transaction of modern life. You press buttons on a glass screen. A human being brings you calories. You exchange a polite nod, and you lock the door. That's how the contract works. I walked over to the heavy wooden front door, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled it open. Standing under the flickering, sickly yellow fluorescent light of the hallway was a man. He looked to be in his late 30s, wearing a faded dark windbreaker and baseball cap pulled low, shadowing his eyes. In his right hand, he held a standard insulated thermal delivery bag. In his left, he was already holding out my pizza box. "Hey, there you go," he said. His voice was incredibly flat, monotone, like a machine reading text. "Thanks," I murmured, reaching out to take the warm cardboard box. My fingers brushed against his. His skin was freezing cold. Not chilly from the night air, deathly cold. He didn't let go of the box immediately. He held it for a fraction of a second too long, forcing a slight tug of war before his fingers finally released it. I stepped back, instinctively wanted to close the door, but he didn't move. He stood perfectly rooted to the spot, his eyes scanning past my shoulder. His gaze traveled up the 12-foot ceilings, tracked down the long, empty hallway of my apartment, and lingered on the dark, open doorways of my spare bedroom and bathroom. Then he looked directly into my eyes. A strange, sickeningly hollow expression crossed his face. "It's a big apartment for a single person," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. It was a verbal flag planted in my territory. A violent, icy shiver cascaded down my spine. Every single primitive, evolutionary survival instinct I possessed screamed at me in that exact microsecond. My stomach dropped into a bottomless void. My brain instantly flagged the anomaly. Delivery drivers are usually in a rush. They want their tip. They want to get back to their car. They want to beat the clock. This man was completely still. His body language was entirely devoid of urgency. He was evaluating. I panicked and I lied. "No," I said, my voice cracking slightly before I forced a fake, confident firmness into it. "No, my roommates are sleeping in the back. They have an early shift tomorrow." The man's head tilted slightly to the left, just a fraction of an inch. It was an uncanny, animalistic movement. His lips slowly peeled back into a smile. It wasn't a warm smile. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes remained completely dead, wide and unblinking under the brim of his cap. "Oh," he whispered. "Good to know." He nodded once, turned around on his heel, and began walking down the long hallway toward the exit. I slammed the door shut, turned the deadbolt, and leaned my back against the solid wood. My breath was ragged. I felt incredibly stupid. You're being paranoid, I told myself. He was just making awkward small talk. People are weird. The world is full of socially inept people. Don't be a victim of your own imagination. I walked into the kitchen, set the pizza box down on the granite counter, and took a deep breath. I reached into my pocket to grab my phone, intending to give the guy a standard 3-star review just for making me uncomfortable. As soon as I illuminated the screen, my heart stopped. 10 minutes had passed since I opened the door. It was now 10:22 p.m. My phone vibrated with a push notification from the food app. Your delivery driver has arrived at your door with your order. I stared at the words. I read them 3 times. 4 times. My brain flatly refused to process the syntax. No, he already delivered it, I thought, staring at the steaming pizza box on my counter. The app is just lagging. It's a glitch. I tapped the notification. The tracking screen opened. The little GPS icon of the delivery driver was currently updating in real time. It showed him pulling up to the front curb of my building. But it wasn't the GPS that made the blood drain entirely from my face. It was a profile picture. The assigned driver on the app was a young, college-age kid with a bright, goofy smile and a high-visibility jacket. A completely different human being. A kid named Leo. The man who had just stood at my door. The man who knew my roommates were supposedly sleeping. The man who smiled when I lied to him was not an employee. He wasn't a delivery driver. He was a ghost who walked up to my door with a pizza box and an empty thermal bag. My hands began to shake so violently I almost dropped the phone. The sheer mathematical terror of the situation began to piece itself together in my mind. He had intercepted the real driver? No, the real driver was outside right now. This man had bought a pizza, put it in a bag, and walked up to my specific apartment unit. He knew who lived here. I froze. A horrible, sickening realization hit me. I needed to see if he was gone. I crept across the hardwood floor. I didn't lift my feet. I slid them, terrified of making the wood creak. The apartment felt suffocatingly large now. The shadows stretched out from the corners like reaching hands. I reached the front door, pressed my chest against the cold wood, and aligned my right eye with the brass marilla, the peephole. The hallway outside was bathed in that dim, buzzing yellow light. He was still there. He hadn't gone to the elevator. He hadn't taken the stairs. He was standing exactly 3 feet away from my door, facing it directly. He was completely motionless, like a statue carved out of shadow. In his right hand, the empty blue thermal bag hung loosely, brushing against his jeans. He was just standing there, waiting, listening. My phone rang. The sudden, piercing electronic chime in the dead silence of my apartment felt like a physical blow to my chest. I gasped, leaping backward, my phone nearly slipping from my sweat-slicked palms. The screen illuminated with a black background. No caller ID. My thumb hovered over the glass. Every logical fiber of my being told me to ignore it, to dial 911 immediately. But the sheer, hypnotic terror of the moment paralyzed my judgment. I needed to know. I needed to hear what this nightmare wanted. I swiped to answer. I pressed the phone to my ear. My voice was a broken, pathetic whimper. Hello? Silence. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the faint, hollow hiss of static. Then a wet, low intake of breath. The voice that came through the receiver was a low, gravelly whisper. It was the exact same flat, mechanical cadence of the man standing on the other side of my door. You should have looked at the app before you opened the door, he whispered. My lungs locked up. I couldn't breathe. And I know you're alone. The voice continued, dripping with a terrifying, calm confidence. I checked the windows from the street. No lights in the back. No shadows. Just you. Before I could even scream, a sound cut to the phone line and through the air in front of me simultaneously. Chink. Scritch. It was the unmistakable, metallic scrape of metal sliding into metal. A key. He was inserting a key into my deadbolt. My brain exploded into pure, unfiltered adrenaline. The building management had been doing renovations. The subcontractors had master keys. The previous tenants had copies. He didn't need to kick the door down. He had a way in. The heavy brass lock clicked. The handle began to turn. I didn't think. If I stayed in the living room, I was trapped in the open. I turned and bolted down the hardwood hallway, my socks slipping on the polished surface. I chose the bathroom because it was the only room with a solid core privacy door and a heavy manual lock. Just as my feet crossed the threshold of the bathroom, I heard the heavy thud of my apartment front door swinging open and hitting the interior wall. Thump. He was inside. I slammed the bathroom door shut, twisted the metal lock until it clicked, and threw my entire weight against it. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My breath came in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. He wasn't rushing. That was the most terrifying part. There was no sound of sprinting footsteps. He didn't run after me. He didn't yell, "Step, step, step." I could hear the slow, rhythmic creak of his shoes moving deliberately across the parquetry floor. He was walking through my living room. He passed the kitchen. He was navigating the layout of my home with the casual familiarity of an owner returning back after work. He knew exactly where the hallway led. He knew exactly where I had run. He stopped directly outside the bathroom door. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, and utterly suffocating. I could hear the faint, rhythmic ticking of the wall clock out in the kitchen. I could hear the blood roaring in my own ears like a distant ocean storm. Then came a sound that made my bladder almost fail. Tap, tap, tap. He gently knocked on the wood with his knuckles. It was a polite, playful gesture that felt entirely psychotic given the context. "Your roommates sleep far too quietly," his voice whispered through the crack beneath the door. I compressed my body against the wood, pushing my bare feet against the base of the porcelain sink opposite the door, effectively turning my own skeletal frame into a human brace. Every single muscle in my body was trembling so violently, I felt like I was going to vomit. "Get the fuck out of here." I screamed, tears finally spilling over my eyelids, blurring my vision. "Get out. The police are already on their way. They're coming right now." A low, amused chuckle vibrated through the wood against my spine. It was a wet, horrible sound. "No, they aren't," the man said, his voice dropping into a completely flat, chillingly rational tone. "You didn't have time to call. You were too busy running." He was right. I looked down at my hands. My phone was still active on the call screen. The no-caller ID call had disconnected. I hadn't dialed 911. I had been so utterly paralyzed by fear that I had let him dictate the timeline. With thumbs that felt like clumsy blocks of ice, I backed out the call screen, pulled up the keypad, and punched in the 3 digits. I hit the green call button. Click. The moment the call initiated, the man outside realized his window of absolute control was closing. The polite, slow-play psychological torture vanished in an instant. The metal door handle violently jerked up and down. Rattle, rattle, rattle. "Open the door," he commanded, his voice no longer a whisper. It was loud, booming, and completely devoid of human emotion. 911. "What is your emergency?" A crisp, professional female voice echoed from the phone speaker. "Help me, please. Someone is in my apartment. He's trying to break into the bathroom." I shrieked, pressing the phone to my face. "Address is 442 North Broadway, apartment 4B. Please, he has a key, he's inside." Boom. A massive, violent force slammed against the exterior of the bathroom door. The wood groaned. The frame splintered slightly near the top hinge. I was thrown forward an inch, my feet skidding against the tile floor before I locked my legs back into place against the sink. "I'm counting to 3. The man's voice barked from the other side. It was a heavy, rhythmic grunting sound now. "If you don't open this door, I am going to break your legs." "Units are being dispatched to your location right now, ma'am," the 911 operator said, her voice remaining calm but escalating in urgency. "Stay on the line with me. Can you barricade the door?" "I am the barricade." I sobbed. "He's breaking it down." Boom. The second strike was deafening. The structural integrity of the hollow core, wooden door, completely gave way. The top panel shattered inward with a sickening crash of splintering fibers. A spray of sharp wooden shards rained down over my head and shoulders, cutting into my cheek. Through the newly created jagged gap at the top of the door, a hand clad in a thick, black industrial rubber glove thrust through the jagged hole. The fingers groped blindly for a second, feeling the air, before locking onto the manual metal thumb turn lock on the inside of the door. No, no, no! I screamed, reaching up with one hand to swat at the gloved arm, but the leverage was completely against me. With a sickening, definitive click, the gloved hand twisted the lock. The door was kicked violently from the outside. The sheer momentum broke my leg lock against the sink, throwing me sideways onto hard, unforgiving white tile floor. My phone flew out of my hand, skidding into the corner beneath the toilet, the operator's voice still tinny and distant, shouting into the empty room. The door swung wide open. The man stepped into the small, cramped bathroom. Up close, he smelled horribly of stale tobacco and cheap chemical detergent. He looked down at me with a completely blank expression, his chest rising and falling with heavy, rhythmic breaths from the exertion of kicking the door. He reached into the deep pocket of his windbreaker. He didn't pull out a knife. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a thick, heavy roll of silver industrial duct tape. He looked at the tape, then looked at my ankles, and then looked at my face. He slowly began to peel the silver adhesive back. Screech. The sound was incredibly loud in the confined space. He smiled that dead, empty smile again. "Be quiet now," he said. Thud, 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 thud. The sound didn't come from inside the bathroom. It came from the outer hallway of the apartment. Heavy, chaotic, frantic footsteps echoing off the hardwood. "Hey, police are on the way." I called them. "Get the fuck out of her apartment." A voice bellowed from the living room. It was Marcus, my neighbor from down the hall. The man's dead smile vanished instantly. His eyes widened in genuine panic shock. He hadn't accounted for the neighbors. He had assumed the half-empty building meant absolute isolation. But my screams through the thin apartment walls and the violent impact of him throwing his body against the bathroom door had resonated down the corridor. Marcus had heard the commotion, seen my front door standing wide open, and charged in with a heavy metal golf club in his hands. The intruder didn't hesitate. He dropped the roll of duct tape onto the floor, turned on his heel, and bolted out of the bathroom. "Marcus, he has a key. Don't let him leave." I shrieked, scrambling to my knees, my hands slipping on the broken shards that were covering the floor. I stumbled out of the bathroom just in time to see a chaotic blur of motion in my living room. The intruder tried to sprint for the front door, but Marcus was blocking the narrow entryway. Marcus swung the golf club with pure, unadulterated rage, catching the man squarely across the shoulder with a sickening crack. The intruder yelled out, a high-pitched, pathetic grunt of pain, and stumbled backward into my television stand, sending the screen crashing to the floor. Elena, Marcus's wife, was standing out in the hallway, frantically pulling the manual fire alarm lever on the wall. A deafening, piercing electronic siren began to wail throughout the entire building complex. Beep, beep, beep. Red strobe lights began flashing in the corridor. The intruder was completely trapped. He was frantic now, like a rat in a cage. He lunged at Marcus again, tried to use his body weight to tackle him out of the doorway, but Marcus held his ground, wrestling the man to the floor. Within 90 seconds, though it felt like 90 years, the stairwell exploded with the sound of heavy, tactical boots. 3 police officers, weapons drawn, burst through the open doorway, guided by the flashing fire alarm and Elena's frantic waving. "Police, don't move. Get on the ground. Face down. Now!" They slammed the intruder into the hardwood floor, pulled his arms behind his back with violent efficiency. The metallic click of handcuffs echoing through the room was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. One of the officers ran over to me, wrapping a heavy jacket around my shaking shoulders, asking me questions I could barely understand to the fog of my shock. That night was etched into my soul with a branding iron. It changed the entire trajectory of my life. I broke my lease the very next morning. I packed everything I owned into a U-Haul truck with the help of my parents and moved back into their suburban home that weekend. I couldn't sleep without a light on for a year. Every time I heard a key turn in a lock, every time a floorboard creaked, Every time a delivery driver knocked on a door, my heart would stop. Eventually, the police investigation concluded, and the man, a thrice-convicted stalker who had obtained a master key copy from a disgruntled former maintenance worker, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. I thought it was over. I thought the universe had extracted its toll from me and that I was finally safe to rebuild my life. I was completely wrong. Update: 1 week ago, the second key. It has been exactly 2 years since that nightmare occurred. I have spent thousands of dollars on therapy. I eventually moved out of my parents' house again, bought a small, highly secure townhouse in a completely different city, installed a top-of-the-line Ring doorbell system, triple reinforced deadbolts, and smart locks that don't even use physical keys. I finally felt like I had conquered the fear. I was no longer walking on eggshells. Then, last Thursday, my past came knocking. Quite literally. I was sitting in my living room at around 2 p.m., working from home, when my phone buzzed with an alert from my front door security camera. Motion detected at your front door. My stomach did a familiar, unpleasant flip. I opened the app and looked at the live feed. Standing on my porch was a delivery courier in a standard FedEx uniform. He was holding a medium-sized cardboard box. He looked perfectly normal, professional. He tapped the doorbell, waited a few seconds, set the box down on my doormat, turned around, and walked back to his delivery van. I breathed a sigh of relief. See? Normal life. Just a package. I went to the front door, unlocked the deadbolts, opened it, and picked up the box. It was addressed to my full legal name, but there was no return address. Just a printed shipping label from a distribution center 2 states over. I took it to the kitchen counter, grabbed a pair of scissors, and sliced through the clear packing tape. Inside the box were 2 items. The first was a brand new, completely sealed roll of silver industrial duct tape. The second was a small, transparent plastic Ziploc bag. Inside the bag was a single, shiny brass key. Taped to the bottom of the plastic bag was a small piece of lined notebook paper with a single sentence written in shaky, jagged, handwritten blue ink. The police only found the first copy. My phone slipped from my hands, shattering against the kitchen tiles. The world around me turned completely gray. I immediately called a detective who had handled my case 2 years ago. I spent 4 hours at the police station that afternoon, hyperventilating in an interrogation room, while they took the box into evidence for forensic analysis. The detective called me back this morning. His voice sounded incredibly grim over the phone line. They ran the fingerprints on the notebook paper and the plastic bag. They didn't belong to the man who broke into my apartment 2 years ago. He is still firmly locked away in a maximum security state penitentiary, serving his 12-year sentence with zero possibility of parole for another 4 years. The fingerprints belonged to his older brother, a man who had vanished from public records shortly after the trial, a man who, according to my smart lock digital activity log, which the police reviewed, had been standing outside my new townhouse at 3:14 a.m. the previous night, testing a physical key against my electronic keypad lock before realizing there was no keyhole. He didn't want to break in while I was asleep. Not yet. He wanted me to know he was here. He wanted me to know that the trap was still open. He wanted to watch me walk on eggshells all over again. I am currently writing this from an undisclosed hotel room under an assumed name. My townhouse is locked down, surrounded by private security that I am paying for with the last of my savings. The first time this happened, I survived because of a lucky coincidence and a brave neighbor. This time, there are no roommates to pretend are sleeping in the back. There is no house made of cardboard to hide in. I am changing my name. I am leaving the country. If you are reading this, and you ever get a strange feeling about the person standing outside your door, do not lie to them. Do not try to be polite. Lock the door, look at the app, and call the police before they ever find a way inside.